Hi and welcome. My name's Adam Lefever Hughes. I'm the education coordinator for the Association of Lutheran Church Musicians, and I'm here with Zeb Highben, who has agreed to have a conversation with me about another one of our Raabe Prize winners, the 2019 prize-winning piece for the Raabe Prize for Excellence in Sacred Composition, which is Jesus, Refuge of the Weary by Timothy Shaw. I had an opportunity to speak with Tim a little bit, and we weren't quite able to schedule him being on a video for us to have a conversation, but I was able to send him some questions, and he gave us some written answers. And so you'll be hearing a little bit actually from him, just kind of by proxy. But Zeb, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Absolutely.
Zeb, you were the chair of the selection committee for this for 2019, right? I think I'm not imagining that because
You are not.
I think I was on that committee at that
You
time
were on the committee at that time for you
before I
for
moved
ALC.
into this role. I don't
Yeah.
serve on that committee anymore. But Zeb, I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about the committee that year and just sort of the whole process.
Sure. So it's worth pointing out because I might get the dates confused. The prize is awarded in odd numbered years, which parallel the biennial conventions at which they're announced and awarded. I mean, I think they're announced before the conventions, but
Yeah.
we make a bigger deal out of it at the business meetings at the conventions. But the searching and the evaluating happens in the even numbered year. So this was the 2019 prize, but we were looking at scores and deliberating in 2018, the latter months of 2018.
Right.
Our committee was myself, you, Becky Swanson, who at the time was in Holman, Wisconsin. Now I think she's in northern Minnesota, and Paul Westermeyer. We had 36 entries in 2018, 2019. And over the course of the adjudication process, the committee came to a unanimous recommendation for Tim's piece, Jesus, Refuge of the Weary. The process is blind. We don't know who the composers are. All identifying information, including if it's a published score, who the publisher is, that's all removed from the materials by the staff of ALCM before they're sent to us to look at. And then we go through usually several rounds of people looking at all the pieces, studying them on their own, coming together to discuss them. And as always, it was a robust and fruitful discussion. But we were really pleased with this piece and many of its aspects and how well it fit the criterion for the prize.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for that. So, yeah, that criteria you can find that on the ALCM website, but and I've temporarily lost it here, but essentially we're looking for pieces that really lift up congregational song or grow out of that worship as being kind of as being really just central to our Christian lives, and also that reflect some sort of greater excellence on the part of the composer. And of course, Tim, he's been writing for quite a while and really does some lovely stuff. So I wonder if with that background, if we can kind of launch into some of the questions that I asked him, and we can chat a little bit about his piece. So I asked Tim a little bit about his background. I always find it interesting to think about and to learn more about composers, mostly to realize that they're just, human beings, well, most of them, and that they have backgrounds and histories and that they came from somewhere. And so I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about Tim's background as he writes it.
Sure. And, to anybody who might have just started the video and didn't watch Adam's introduction, I'm going to be sharing some of the written answers that Tim provided to Adam. Anybody who knows Tim and Tim's works may associate him with piano writing. He is a pianist, and his initial musical experiences were taking piano lessons starting in grade 3. but his piano teacher was also a composer, he says, and she was the first person to encourage him um, to try to write music, to put his ideas down on paper. And the first piece he ever wrote, he says, was a 1 minute handbell piece that he wrote for a handbell ensemble that she directed at the private school where she taught, presumably, and that he attended in New Hampshire. He majored in piano in college, but then switched over to composition at the encouragement of his theory professor, who saw great promise in his part writing assignments.
Yeah.
And then over his career as a music director in a variety of churches and pursuing some advanced degrees in composition and theory, he started writing more and more choral and instrumental music for especially church ensembles. And then published his first piece in 2005 with Morning Star Music, who put out a Christmas anthem that he had written while in college.
Yeah. I'm really struck by his answers there that so much of his encouragement, he was encouraged by mentors and by other people. And I think that's a good message to all of us, whether we're working in a context, a church context or not, that you never know what kind of an impact you're going to have on
Yeah,
someone.
yeah, and encouraged from a young age, right? I mean, this
Right.
points out the significance of things like children's choirs and piano lessons and Lutheran summer music. I mean, giving young people opportunities um, to understand that, like all other aspects of musical life, composition is open to them, and
Mm.
you're not just born good at it. It's something that you learn and that grows with you, and that they are skills that you can develop over time.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good reminder. It really is. So his piece, Jesus Refuge of the Weary, as we said, it was the winner of the 2019 prize. What does Tim tell us about how this submission came about, or the composition of it, and why it was composed? There is I think at the top a dedication.
Yeah, the piece is dedicated to Howard and Betty Martin with gratitude, and uh, there's a sad story, and in it a gift of kindness, as Tim shares. It was 2015, and his father-in-law had suffered and eventually died from a heart attack. Um, and he and his wife lived quite a distance away, but wanted to travel to be with him in the few days before his death. So a choir member at the church that Tim was serving um, gave her frequent flyer miles from their own, kind of account, so that she could fly out quickly to be by her father's bedside.
Mhm.
And then Tim wrote this piece to that couple, to those choir members, as a thank you for that kindness, for that Christian charity in a moment of real challenge for him and his wife.
Yeah, yeah. It's a really beautiful story, and I think the idea of, or I wonder, I guess, the ideas that were swirling around of feeling weary in that moment, and not being able to be there, or the worry of not being able to be there. I wonder if the text that he chose uh, may have been, I guess, part of that story. Um,
Yeah, and here I'll interject a little bit from the adjudication committee. One of the things that we noted in evaluating the piece, um, one of the attributes that we greatly appreciated was um, it's a beautiful reflective text by Girolamo Savonarola, translated into English by Jane Wilde, and it's beautiful poetry, but it also centers Christ and the cross, right? Which of course is important for Lutherans, and hearing this sort of origin story that Tim shares just kind of reinforces that. The centrality of, if you think of this as a kind of a funeral piece, a kind of a piece that was written in in honor of folks who helped the Shaws mark a family member's death. What do we do as Lutherans in the funeral liturgy? We center Christ in the cross through which we are redeemed and brought to new life. So there's just a really lovely cyclical nature to this text in this setting.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, speaking of that sort of centrality of the cross, I'm remembering a little bit of the conversation since I was on the committee about about his creative use of kind of color chords and notes throughout the piece, and that the voice leading was just so smooth, and the piano writing just spot on. Speaking as a pianist, I've played some um, accompaniments that are, I'll just say awkward, but Tim's are not, and so I sort of noted some of this, and I asked, you know, what kind of process do you use, or what were you thinking about when you were working through some of these characteristics of these color chords and all of that?
Yeah, and like a lot of choral composers, Tim said that the text always comes first, and that he spends considerable time contemplating that, and then coming up with sort of a musical plan based on his understanding of the poetry. Um, in this case, and I think this is quite interesting. When there were certain words or phrases that he wanted to underscore harmonically, he would borrow chords from the parallel minor or major modes.
Mhm.
And he gives some examples. So if people watching the video have the score to hand, they might look at measure 8, where the phrase "whom we love" borrows from B flat major. In measure 16, "sinners fall" borrows from F minor, and 4 bars later, measure 20 to measure 21, he again borrows from F minor for the phrase "the pain of all." That comes back, that F minor borrowing, one more time at the very end with the crucified in measure 60. So sinners fall, pain of all people, and then the crucified Christ are all connected through that use of F minor. And then in measure 37, grace has taught us,
Yeah.
tiptoes into C major, the major mode for that moment of hope and lightness.
Yeah. Yeah. It really is, you know, when we start looking at those that use of color chords and borrowing it, and you really kind of see his plan emerge. It's really, and I think that's a good lesson for those of us who dabble in composing. That it's good to take that sort of 30,000 foot view, and to really think through some of those. The ways to connect across the whole. Um, yeah.
Yeah, Dave Sherwood likes to say, get out of tonic, right? Find some way, some place, some moment when you can do something surprising, when you can borrow from another key area, or a related key area.
Sure.
Um, it generates musical interest, and especially in uses like Tim's, it draws attention to those particular moments of a text.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, I was also thinking, I was reading through some of his comments, and that this that he spends quite a bit of time at the same time as determining where and how to use these kind of departures from the normal key or whatever. He does spend quite a bit of time singing through the parts that he is writing to ensure that they work and that they are singable and free of awkward syllabic emphasis and things like that. And
I
I
would
think,
absolutely agree with that. There's nothing more important that a choral composer can do than to sing the choral parts while writing them or after writing them, to make sure that the voice leading works, that if you have a large skip up or down, it's intentional. It happens in the way you want it to happen. That the syllabic stress is right. Yeah, all of those things. And you can think they're right if you're writing at the piano or keyboard or writing in your head. But until you've actually sung them, you cannot know for sure. And you can't encounter the kind of bumps in the road that your choir might have, that a choir might have,
Mhm.
until you've sung through them yourself. That's a really valuable step.
Yeah, I know myself. I've tried I'll say arranging a couple things here and there for different forces that I may have. And I think, oh, yes, this will work. And then I've come to find out that I've put tritone leaps all over the place. The tenors are mad at me and the altos are mad at me because I only have one note to sing for three measures. And
Well, the altos should be used to that, right? That's
well, they
that's what
are, but
them all the
that doesn't
time.
make it right.
That's
No.
true. You're right. You're right.
Yeah, but that really editing and all of that. I thought it was interesting. He wrote in response to what might you tell budding composers about the composition process. He writes, I spend an inordinate amount of time editing, and then in parentheses he writes, and often discarding
Mhm.
my initial musical ideas. And coming up or coming out with 90% of good writing is rewriting. And I love this Brahms quote that he uses of it is not hard to compose, but what is fabulously hard is to leave the superfluous notes under the table. And I think there's a lot of truth to that in any kind of writing, whether it's music or even just written word. Um, it's editing. I used to say, I'll never get editor's block. And so just
I like that. I like that too. I'll never get editor's block. Yeah, the editing process and more notes isn't always better. More complicated isn't always better. Um, and those are things I think you can sort of tease out as you go back and edit. And sometimes it's hard to edit your own stuff too. I mean, sometimes asking a trusted colleague for help and for advice can be really useful.
that's for sure. Yeah, it's easy to get so close to something that you can't really see it. Um, yeah, so I wonder, we've talked a lot about the things that Tim talked about here, but is there anything else that you want to lift up here, Zeb, as we finish up talking about this wonderful?
Yeah, maybe it would be nice just to read through the comments from the committee. We would issue when we would go through the adjudication process. We would, in the end, write a report that we would submit to the ALCM board for inclusion in their minutes and their records, and to cite when they announced. So they had some language to use when they announced the winner of the piece. Um, and in our report from 2018, 2019, we said that among the many outstanding attributes of this composition, we particularly note, and then we had a list of
Hmm.
6 or 7 things that we were most moved by. The first being the really lovely, gentle melody in this anthem. The second, relating to the discussion we just had about color chords, was the careful balance between traditional diatonic harmonies and some of those moments of borrowing for color purposes. The way Tim uses key, tempi, and rhythmic figures to illuminate the various character changes in the text. Harmony and melody are not the only elements of musical composition that can help us pull ideas or themes or impressions out of a poem. We already talked about the beauty of the poetry and its centering of Christ. Um, the usefulness of this piece. I mean, you read it, you read the poem, and you maybe most immediately think of Lent. And I think I would commend it to anyone for that season. Um, but it's also got a broad usefulness. Funerals and memorial services, any time that you might have more of a penitential Kyrie sort of theme. Christian hope is replete throughout this poem, and Tim's very sensitive setting of it. And then the final thing we appreciated was it would be a very accessible piece for choirs of varying sizes and abilities. It's also, there are churches that don't have organs or that don't have particularly strong organs, or maybe they have an organ but they don't have an organist right now. There aren't enough of our organist colleagues around in some parts of the country. This is a beautiful piano accompaniment, and if you've got a skilled high school or young collegiate pianist, they with appropriate rehearsal could play this, and it will sound absolutely gorgeous and lovely.
Yeah. Yeah, it's I'm so glad that we're able to lift this up and to really talk about it's a beautiful piece and we really commend it to you, those of you watching and or listening, as a possibility for your plans. So Zeb, thanks so much for your time, and I thank you all so much for joining us, and we look forward to doing the next one.